And welcome to our continuing coverage of the crises in New York and also Washington, D.C. Target America, enemy unknown. Apparently terrorist strikes taking place in the span of an hour and 45 minutes. You're looking at a replay of videotape of the second of two hijacked airplanes smashing into the wall of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. That particular strike came minutes after 9 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. The first tower had already been hit by a similar hijacked plane, flying bombs, if you will. This then is video taken from about 10 a.m. after that tower, the second one which was hit. That tower could no longer stand the strain of the flames that weakened the structural elements, and the tower collapsed, sending concrete, glass, steel raining down almost a quarter-mile onto the streets below. This now, the second tower, the one that was hit by the first plane, also collapsing earthbound in a deafening and terrible and fiery conflagration of smoke, flames, and certainly tremendous loss of life. Perhaps as many as 50,000 people scheduled to work in the World Trade Center towers on this day. It's unknown at this point how many of them were able to make it out. Certainly there were people who did get out from as high as, we have reports, as high as the 92nd floor. But clearly an estimate of perhaps 10,000 people dead, and that number may go higher. Now, these pictures from earlier outside the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., or just across the river they're from. 9:45 a.m. on the south wall of the Pentagon, a hijacked airliner believed to be United Airlines was smashed into the outside south ring of the Pentagon. You can see the smoke billowing up from the headquarters of our nation's armed forces. The building's still on fire. They have not been able to get it out yet. And in fact, we have been told that the flames have penetrated not only the outer ring, but also the inner rings of the Pentagon. Firefighters are trying to get a handle on it, but in a building of that size, they are having a very difficult time. President Bush was spirited away from an event in Sarasota, Florida, put aboard Air Force One, where he made a statement to the nation upon landing at a previously undisclosed location. Shreveport, Louisiana is where the president turned up. He is safe, and so far all officials of the U.S. government, it appears, are safe. But for the first time in this nation's history, all air travel has been grounded. All airports shut down. These are pictures of what's left of the World Trade Center. You can see those leaning shells of what used to be a very familiar sight to many Americans. The steel and glass and concrete towers rising up 110 stories proud. They are simply enormous piles of rubble right now. Again, we do not know how many people have died. There could have been as many as 50,000 people in the building at that time of the morning. Certainly many hundreds of people who were on board those hijacked airliners have died. One of them, American Airlines Flight 11, it was scheduled to fly from Boston to LAX, 92 people on board. Also American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Washington to Los Angeles Airport, 64 people on board. A couple of United Airlines planes also apparently taken by force by these suicide hijackers bent on causing the maximum amount of destruction possible, and they have done that, inflicting damage on New York City and on Washington, D.C., that even in the worst terrorist scenarios, nobody could have imagined. I want to bring into the discussion now my co-anchor Linda Vester and also Neil Cavuto, who is with us. The stock markets throughout the nation are shut down. The NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange never opened today. The world financial markets really in turmoil.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, to jump on that, I think it's important to keep in mind, besides the carnage that you outlined, John, and I know Linda will shortly, this is the financial capital of the United States, folks. This is the financial capital of the world, and that is as important and symbolic as the choice of airlines that these guys decided to hit, United and American. When you can bring to a halt all trading in the wealthiest country on the planet, you have also done a service to your cause, even though a clear calamity to ours. The New York Stock Exchange shut down today. It was supposed to open late. It decided not to open at all. The NASDAQ was shut down today. But here's what's interesting about the World Trade Center. It is actually a complex of buildings way beyond the two gigantic towers that John pointed out that collapsed today. It houses some of the most pedigree firms and financial names on the planet. Morgan Stanley Dean Witter has essentially been demolished today. Offices that are housed there are now gone from there. They occupied the upper tier floors in the so-called One World Trade Center that was hit by that second plane. We should also point out that the New York Mercantile Exchange was essentially destroyed today. That is where much of the world's oil and energy and metals trading is done. Why is that important? Because if you can stop that or disrupt that, you can cause those prices to dramatically rise. And that is exactly what's happened. Some of the fallout from this goes way beyond the smoke and fires you're seeing there on that screen. Oil prices rocketing today, up to $32 a barrel, a better than $6 advance. We're also seeing stock markets across the world falling on this, on concerns that the safe haven of the world is in considerable disarray. Linda.
We want to take you now to Washington, D.C. You now know that the U.S. military has been placed on high alert status. That is U.S. military personnel in the United States and all around the world. There is also, just to give you more information, amid this fire at the Pentagon, apparently from this plane crash earlier this morning, there is a full air cap around all of Washington, D.C. We thought we take it to Tony Snow, who is monitoring things in Washington. He has more new information. Tony?
Thanks, Linda. Well, the Pentagon, Craig Quigley, the Rear Admiral, who's a well-known public affairs officer, has given an off-camera briefing to some of our reporters. He said the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was, in fact, in the Pentagon at the time of the explosion, and furthermore, tried to make his way within the building to the site of the explosion. He went outside for a bit of time to try to assist with some of the wounded, then was ushered back in, and he's now at the National Military Command Center, which obviously is serving as a hub of not only gathering and providing information, but also trying to formulate a follow-up strategy to today's acts of terrorism around the country. And here's Craig Quigley.
The Defense can impose around the world. They are imposed on a local basis, because what may be true here in Washington could be very different in San Diego or some other location. Here in Washington, D.C., we are at threat condition Delta. That is the highest condition that we can go to. That is the absolutely appropriate thing to do given the events of this morning. What seems to have happened is that we had an aircraft intentionally fly into the Pentagon. For those of you with cameras, you can see the spot behind me. There were intense fires following the aircraft's impact into the building. Arlington Search and Rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense. The fires are still burning in the Pentagon, at least in that vicinity. We have a variety, too many to even mention, of local first responders, fire departments, police departments, you name it, that have rushed to the aid of the Pentagon here and the people. Each of the military departments is working to set up an 800 toll-free number where family members can call to find out the status of their loved ones. As soon as we have those phone numbers, we will give them to you. I would ask for your help, please, in getting those numbers out as far and wide and quickly as possible so that we can alleviate some of the concern for individuals who have loved ones that work in the Pentagon. I don't have a feel for the extent of damage to the building, but it was significant. And again, fires are still burning, at least in several places in the building. That's about what I know. I'll try to answer some of your questions, but you're going to have a lot more questions than I have.
How far did the aircraft
The individual right here.
Explain what happened to you personally at the time of the impact. What did you see and hear and feel, if anything, and how did you respond? What were you trained to do in that situation?
Well, despite the size of the Pentagon building, many in the building felt a thud and heard kind of a muffled explosion. And it was, at that point, the Defense Protective Service, the fire department, others took off for action to the impact point in the building. The building was very quickly evacuated. People were sent as far away from the building as possible. Many people were sent home. And again, with a request, please call your loved ones right away to let them know you're okay. People were, again, sent as far away from the building as possible. We didn't know what might happen next, and the fire was burning very fiercely at that point in time.
Was there
Go ahead. No, I sensed no panic. People were moving very quickly for the exits to the building, but it was all very controlled.
Do you know what happened?
Investigation. Is the FBI handling this, or are there any military agencies?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is the FBI handling this exclusively, or is there any military organizations that are helping with the investigation?
Well, I'm sure the FBI will probably have the lead on this as any domestic sort of circumstance. We will assist where...
All right, that is Admiral Quigley. We want to take you now to a spokesman for the Washington D.C. Police. Let's listen into what he has to say.
Intelligence reports from a variety of federal agencies. Once all that information has been received, the House and Senate leadership will make a determination as how they would like to proceed from this point forward. No, we do not have a plane to approach the Capitol today. I'm sorry?
Are they going in session tonight? Are they going to be in session tomorrow?
That decision will be handled by the House and Senate leadership. We'll have that later on this afternoon. As soon as I have word, the leadership will either issue that statement themselves or they'll issue a statement through me.
Can they be in session anywhere but the Capitol building? Can they conduct business somewhere else at an off-site location?
I don't anticipate that to happen.
Who just got into the chopper that landed on the Capitol grounds?
That's an area that deals with direct security, national security issues. I'm sorry, I can't disclose that information. What I can tell you is we have taken.
All right, so we have apparently lost, at least temporarily, our connection to Washington, D.C. But look here, live pictures once again. These from just across the Potomac River of the Pentagon, still on fire, a fire burning out of control after a hijacked airliner. We believe this one to have been a United Airlines flight, smashed into the Pentagon around 9:45 this morning. That was only the capper to what had already been a horrific morning. Just before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, another hijacked airliner smashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. A second plane, also hijacked, smashed into the second tower shortly thereafter. You're about to see video of the 9:10 approximately crash. That suicide bomber smashing into that World Trade Center tower. It was not long before that tower collapsed. The other one followed soon thereafter. The loss of life so far catastrophic, estimated at 10,000, but that number could go much higher. Shepard Smith is joining us now from the Fox Newsroom. Shepard?
John, we're getting a great deal of information. I want to pass along the good news now, as it appears to be that the Department of Defense was very lucky today. This from our David Schuster, who is still there, who reports that it appears the jetliner crash at the Pentagon could have been much worse. We are now told that the wedge of the Pentagon, which was hit, recently underwent renovations, and that this particular area was largely unoccupied at the time of the attack this morning. As a result of that, the number of casualties at the Pentagon could be much lower than many had feared. In fact, we're now told that only 40 people are being treated at a nearby hospital, 7 of those listed in critical condition. On another note, the plane which crashed southwest of Pittsburgh this day. You may remember Britt Hume was on the air earlier today reporting that there was a plane jetting up the Potomac, and that there were fears, at least, that this plane, this jet, might be en route to cause more problems at the White House. The White House was evacuated just around the time Britt Hume was making that report. Now we know that that plane crashed. How did that plane crash is one of the questions which is being explored at this moment. There was a cell phone call, which according to the Associated Press and confirmed through the military, that was placed from this particular jet at just before it crashed outside of Pittsburgh. And according to reports, there were 45 people on board this thing. It was 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, and at 9:58 this morning Eastern Time, a passenger on board this plane who claimed to be locked inside a bathroom began screaming on the phone to emergency dispatchers that in fact the plane had been hijacked and he was hiding out in a bathroom trying to get help for this plane. There were 45 people on board it. We have no reports of any survivors. At this moment, there is an urgent plea out in the city of New York for blood donations. And though I know we're broadcasting to a world audience, I want to give what information I can about that because this has apparently become quite serious. While I'm searching for it, I can tell you that the entire Major League Baseball schedule for the remainder of the regular season has been at least postponed. The Emmy Awards, which were scheduled for Sunday night in Los Angeles, have also been postponed. This plea for blood donations in New York City has reached what some are calling critical mass now. There are blood donation centers set up across Manhattan and other boroughs of the city as well, as emergency workers continue to try to pull survivors, for whatever number of them there are, from the scene which you're seeing on your screen right now. So many people running for cover. The lens of that covered in dust as the largest building in the city of New York came crumbling to its knees as thousands of people waited around that building. There was chaos around this building at the moment. The police department of Manhattan, the fire department there, this had just happened. A jet had plowed into the World Trade Center. By the thousands they were piling out of there. People were jumping out of the windows from 30 stories up. People were screaming, running away to radio reporters saying, "I just saw people jumping from 30, 40 stories in the sky." And all of a sudden, as the police and fire departments work to maintain control, after this has happened, the tower collapsed and all of those rescue personnel and people trying to flee this scene were left underneath all of that rubble. The carnage in Manhattan has just begun. The rescue effort is well underway, and we have multiple reports of people coming from their apartment buildings, having just seen what you're witnessing right now, one of the two towers of the World Trade Center collapsing in Lower Manhattan, and residents of this city going out and taking the shirts off their back, applying tourniquets to people's arms, and trying to save as many people as possible. A congressman who was inside the Washington, D.C. police today emerged from that police department and told one of our correspondents that the very early death toll in Manhattan was expected to be around 10,000. John.
Shepard, we have more information coming in. Just to make it clear to all of our viewers who are watching right now, although the scenes you may be seeing on your television are chaotic, it's important to remember there is a government plan in place that has been enacted. It's called the Federal Response Plan. It's been put in place by 28 federal agencies. FEMA involved. It's all led by the Department of Justice. They're involved in crisis management. The FBI is involved in leading the investigation. The plan has been practiced over and over. It's being put in place today. Also, a reminder that as they are asking for blood shortages in New York City, or they're asking for blood donations in New York City with shortages in New York and in Washington, D.C., the U.S. military is on the highest alert both in the United States and around the world. A warship and the National Guard have been dispatched to New York to help with the rescues. We go now to senior correspondent Rita Cosby. She has more information on what the FAA has put in place, a full national ground stop, the first time ever in U.S. history. Rita.
That's right. That ground stop went in place about 9 a.m. Eastern time several hours ago. And some good news from the FAA. They said that they had about 40 to 50 domestic flights that were in the air. And as of about 5 minutes ago, they all had landed. As of 5 minutes ago, they have all landed now, about 40 or 50 domestic flights. These are all the domestic flights that were in the air. Of course, because of that ground stop, Linda, they were ordered to return to their destinations immediately. They are awaiting the arrival. There's a minimal number, we're told, of international flights that are still en route to the West Coast. They are going to be landing at several different times in the next few hours. But we are told from an FAA official that all of those planes are accounted for. In other words, there are no indications of any problems at this point on any of those flights, and there are just a minimal number of those. In addition to that, we are told from a number of U.S. officials are telling Fox News that there are, quote, strong indications that people linked to Osama bin Laden and also his group, the Al-Qaeda group, which is his group that he organizes out of Afghanistan, that they are strong indications that people linked to him and his group are possibly behind this. They say that for a number of reasons. They say that they have the training in place, they have the capabilities in place, the resources in place. Also, an intelligence official telling me that they do have information that bin Laden is in Afghanistan and that there was some movement of his troops in recent weeks, in the last week and a half specifically. They're also looking at the possible connection that in the last few days there is a Northern Alliance figure in Afghanistan who was fighting against the Taliban and was very much against Osama bin Laden, and he had been assassinated in recent days. And soon after that, bin Laden's followers put out a word saying that we're going to attack all enemies of bin Laden. In addition to this, on June 20th of this year, bin Laden and his followers released a videotape in which bin Laden was saying, quote, "It is time to penetrate America and Israel and hit them where it hurts the most." In this, there was no specific warning of an attack, and again, intelligence sources are telling me that they had no idea that this attack was going to happen, but they were certainly getting some hints that there may be something on U.S. soil based on this message that he put out just June 20th of this year. And also, they said on some of the Islamic chat rooms, there's been a heightened amount of activity. There's always been sort of continual threats against the U.S. on these chat rooms, but a heightened amount of activity, particularly in the last week and a half. And U.S. officials are strongly looking at the possibility of bin Laden and also his group, Al-Qaeda, being behind this. The other thing they point out that it was just about a year or so ago, and I remember this when I was covering all the Millennium attacks, the possible Millennium attacks that were basically thwarted all over the world, that one of the things that they were looking at was Osama bin Laden with an Algerian group, and remember he has tentacles all over the world, that they were planning to hijack a number of planes. That was over a year ago, right around the time of the Millennium. And that plan was thwarted in addition to a number of other things. So they learned at that point that the possibility of hijacking planes was something that they were looking at. They also said that there was information, some intelligence information, that he was training individuals for suicide bombings. As we know from the USS Cole, of course, a number of Yemenis have been tried in that case. The trials are still going on at this point. But some of them are believed to have ties to Osama bin Laden, and intelligence officials tell me privately that they believe he was behind that attack. That was where somebody pulled up in a boat and a bomb went off, a suicide bomber in a boat. But they strongly believe that he has the intelligence, the capabilities, and we know from a number of people who were involved in the East Africa bombings, the embassy trial in New York, which took place not too long ago, that many of those were pilots. So he certainly had the capabilities, the finances, and intelligence officials, one senior official telling me just a few moments ago, strong indications that this attack could be possibly linked to him and his group. Back to you.
Rita Cosby in Washington, thank you. Let's go to our Molly Falconer, who is in outside one of the hospitals in Manhattan where the dead and wounded have been taken. Molly?
John, this has been a hospital under siege all morning as the dead and wounded have been brought here to St. Vincent's Hospital in downtown Manhattan. We're calling for blood and for extra supplies, and I'm here with the city controller of New York, Alan Hevesi, who is saying that there are hundreds of firefighters and policemen who are still not accounted for down at the Twin Towers. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I've been told by police officials is that when the first plane hit the first tower, the emergency services, EMS, the firefighters, and the police officers rushed to the scene. Yeah. Then the second plane hit and caused enormous damage, and then the tower collapsed. And there are a number that are not accounted for. They may be all right for all we know, but we're very worried.
And you said one thing coming down here, you are running for office here in New York City, and that election being held today, very symbolic that we've had this attack today, has been postponed, and you are just about to release a statement along with your fellow running mates and competitors about that. What can you give us a preview of that statement?
Well, what we said was we're here to stand in support of the families who are mourning the dead and the huge number of people who are injured in this catastrophe, and that this is not a time for politics, and we fully support the decision to cancel this election.
Two questions. Is 10,000 a realistic number? And there is an emergency bunker, a secret one, inside the World Trade Center. Have you heard any word from that?
Well, we haven't heard anything from the command center. That's which is the headquarters for our emergency services. Again, that doesn't mean that they're not okay, but we haven't heard. Okay. But secondly, there are 50,000 people who work in the World Trade Center. This was 8:45 in the morning. There are another tens of thousands of people who move through the World Trade Center with the subway or the train or eating in the restaurant. So that number could be plausible. We don't know.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. City Controller Alan Hevesi. And we have a press conference here at the hospital slated for 3 o'clock today. They cannot estimate the number of dead and wounded. Back to you, Linda.
All right, Molly Falconer, thank you very much. Just to give you some more information, more than 10,000 rescue personnel have been sent rushing to Lower Manhattan. That is the area where the World Trade Center was located until this morning. There is a shortage of blood. 2 warships and the National Guard have been dispatched to the area to help with the rescue operations. Some of the wounded not only filling up the New York City hospitals, but hospitals across the river into New Jersey. They're just taking people basically wherever they can find room at this point. Once again, we want to take it back to correspondent Rick Leventhal, who has been there on the ground near the World Trade Center, getting people's reaction as they were fleeing from the collapsing buildings. Rick?
And Linda, we just spoke to a couple firefighters who were walking by. They were not eager to stop and talk because they're still trying to figure out if their friends made it. A lot of firefighters responding to the initial explosion, the initial crash of the jets into the towers, and then to the collapse of the first building. A lot of firefighters and other emergency personnel on the ground near the buildings, and there's fear that many of them may have been lost in the collapse of the 2 towers. So firefighters on scene here, not just trying to get the fire out, there's still a fire burning at what's left of the 2 twin World Trade Center towers. But they're also trying to figure out if their friends are still alive, their fellow firefighters. The only vehicles on the street at this point are police vehicles, ambulances, and fire trucks, occasional construction vehicles going by. But the Lower Manhattan, in the several blocks surrounding the World Trade Center, is virtually shut down. It is a major scene here. Police and fire officials everywhere, but their main focus now is to get that fire out and to hopefully find possibly some survivors in the rubble. There were a lot of people on the ground near those buildings when they came crashing down. We were among them. We were a few blocks away, and even a few blocks away, the clouds of smoke and debris coming from the collapse of this 110-story building was huge. It enveloped these blocks, covered people from head to toe with soot and concrete ash. Many of them now just wandering out of here. I talked to a guy who worked a couple of blocks away from the scene. He was able to get into an office nearby and stayed there for most of the morning, and just now is getting out of here. So a lot of people took refuge after this happened, but many more were not able to do that because they were caught up in the collapse of that building. Linda.
Rick Leventhal joining us live from Lower Manhattan. Rick, thanks very much.
All right, continuing to look now at the situation in Lower Manhattan where the Twin Towers once stood. These are live pictures. You saw moments ago the replay of the collapse of those 2 really symbols of American finance and business. The World Trade Center gone today after these terrorist attacks, an attack that President Bush says we will respond to.
We take it now down to Washington. Tony Snow getting more reaction from lawmakers evacuated, obviously, from the Capitol, but now starting to figure out and coordinate their plan of response. Tony?
Linda, thanks. Yes, we're joined from elsewhere in our Washington studios by Senator John Breaux, Louisiana Democrat. Senator Breaux, first, were you in the Capitol at the time of the evacuation today? Senator Breaux, it's Tony Snow. Can you hear me? Well, I'll tell you what, Linda, I think let me just give a couple of little additional items of information. We're going to try to establish our audio contact with Senator Breaux. Let's try once again. Senator Breaux, Tony Snow, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Tony. Great,
thank you. Were you in the Capitol at the time of the evacuation this morning?
Actually, we were, Tony. We were having a Democratic leadership meeting with Tom Daschle and all of the leadership team. When we had the television on, we were watching what was happening with the Twin Towers in New York. And all of a sudden, we could see the smoke coming from the direction of the Pentagon, and were informed that the Capitol was immediately being evacuated.
We've heard some rumors that there may also have been a close overflight of the Capitol. Do you know anything about that?
Tony, when we left the Capitol, we were all just getting out as fast as we could, and it looked like there was a plane that was flying in an unusual area around the Capitol, but I think no one knew whether that was a plane that was trying to do damage, or probably it might have been one of our own planes just surveying the area to make sure things were safe.
Senator, would you like to see Congress reassemble tomorrow? There's been some talk of having a meeting of Congress, A, to demonstrate determination to move on, but B, also to consider a declaration of war.
Well, one of the problems is, who do you declare war against? I think that obviously, everyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent alike, is very determined to get to the bottom of this. At the same time, while we're worried about victims and their families and the rescue mission that is on the way. But I think you're going to see a very strong bipartisan agreement that we have to pursue all possible actions against the responsible parties. It's the difficult job right now, unlike December the 7th, 1941, in Pearl Harbor. We knew who the responsible party was then. I think there's still a great degree of uncertainty as to who those parties are today. We want to strike back. The question is, who do we strike back at?
Senator, also, there's been a lot of debate about budgets and surpluses. All that going to be set aside right now, and people, at least in the Capitol in the short run, focusing on national defense and security?
Tony, I think you're going to see the country coming together, the political leaders in both parties coming together like we haven't seen in a long time. One thing America does in a time of crisis is to stand together, to work together, to look for solutions to these very serious problems. I think you're going to see a lot less bickering and trying to unite to find out who caused this and take every action humanly possible to see to it that it never happens again.
Senator, if you could stand by. We're joined on the phone now by Sandy Berger, who was the National Security Advisor from President Clinton and is well-versed in especially the ways of Osama bin Laden. Mr. Berger, first, your reaction. Does this at least have the feel to you of an Osama bin Laden operation?
Well, it's a massive and coordinated attack on the United States of a kind that we have not seen before, a major escalation of a terrorist assault on the United States. It's a sophisticated operation that obviously involved dozens of people in the United States, penetrating the United States, and I think we've got to be careful not to leap to conclusions, but certainly bin Laden and al-Qaeda would be a suspect.
Would it be your sense or expectations that it would be likely that there would be more attacks, or is there any way to figure that out at this juncture?
I think we're in uncharted waters, Tony, and we've not seen anything like this before. An attack in the United States of this magnitude, involving suicide bombers, involving commercial aircraft. This is, again, a major escalation. We have to be, America, I believe we will know who is responsible for this sooner rather than later. There are enough pieces to this that we will put them together, I think, before long, and the response here has to be strong and sustained. It has to be in coordination with our allies. This is not just an attack on the United States. It's an attack on the civilized world. And there's no single action here that will be sufficient. This will require, I think, a comprehensive and sustained effort to root out what is obviously a very sophisticated operation.
Mr. Berger, earlier Senator Breaux mentioned the fact that at this point it's hard to declare war because we don't know upon whom we should declare war. You've been through this before. You've seen terrorist attacks on American assets. You seem fairly confident this time that we're going to be able to figure out who did it. What pieces of information are there that would lead us to draw that conclusion?
Well, I mean, this involved dozens of people, Tony, and an operation that's presumably been planned over months. A coordinated attack on multiple sites involving American aircraft hijacked from American airports. This is not a single act where someone can get in a getaway car and speed off. So I believe the combination of the forensic FBI investigation as well as the intelligence side of this will, in not too distant future, have a pretty good bead on where what the source of this is.
Sandy Berger, former National Security Advisor for President Clinton, Senator John Breaux, thanks both for joining us. Now let's toss it back to our colleagues in New York.
All right, Tony Snow in Washington, thank you. We are trying to keep an eye not only on the situation at the Pentagon, but also in Lower Manhattan. The pictures you're seeing now came around 10 o'clock this morning Eastern Time when the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, the symbol of American capitalism to many, came tumbling down one after the other. This after they were struck by two hijacked planes. Our Julia Raleigh, a Fox News producer, is on the phone with us now from Lower Manhattan. Julia, do they have a handle on the situation there yet?
There's a lot of people who are standing around, John, who are kind of watching what's going on. There are people trying to fight the fires, but we're standing here just looking at flames and smoke billowing everywhere. The wind will start to blow, and the dust, it's about 6 inches thick where we're standing, will just start to swirl up in these dust devil type storms and blow everything everywhere and around. From right where I'm standing, it doesn't look like it.
The buildings that you're talking about are not just the remnants of the Trade Center itself. You're talking about other buildings nearby.
They're the other towers of the World Trade Center. So Tower 1 and 2 are gone.
And it appears, for the moment, so is our connection with Julia Raleigh, our field producer, reporting live from Lower Manhattan. Yes, the World Trade Center, once the world's tallest building, certainly the tallest in Manhattan, crumbled today. There is very little of it left except a pile of rubble. And as you can imagine, all right, we have now a link with Mayor Giuliani, the mayor of New York City. Let's listen in.
We're all undergoing right now is something that we've had nightmares about, but probably thought wouldn't happen. My heart goes out to all of the innocent victims of this horrible and vicious act of terrorism, acts of terrorism. And our focus now has to be on saving as many lives as possible. We have hundreds of police officers and firefighters who are engaging in rescue efforts in Lower Manhattan. I want to thank Governor Pataki for the incredible cooperation and coordination, and including deploying the National Guard that will be available to relieve our police officers and firefighters and emergency workers in the next couple of hours. The governor and I just spoke to the President of the United States. The coordination with the federal government from the time of the first attack has been excellent, including closing off the airspace around Manhattan and doing everything that can possibly be done in the face of this barbaric act to make the city secure. And we will strive now very hard to save as many people as possible and to send a message that the city of New York and the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists, that our democracy, that our rule of law, that our strength and our willingness to defend ourselves will ultimately prevail. And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal. Everything is safe right now in the city, and the people who are doing the relief effort need all the help they can get. And then, Governor, thank you very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk, and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the President, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, while this is a horrible attack, and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way.
All right, it appears that for the moment we have lost our link to Rudy Giuliani. You're looking at live pictures of American fighter jets, U.S. fighter jets, patrolling the skies over Manhattan now. This after the nation's air traffic control system is in a total lockdown. No planes are flying over this great nation of ours right now, thanks to the actions of some terrorists and hijackers who commandeered the cockpits of 4 airplanes today and used them as flying bombs to take the lives of American people. Let's listen in while we are trying to reestablish our audio link to this news conference involving the governor of New York there, George Pataki, on the left, and Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York City on the right, the soon-to-be outgoing mayor. Today was supposed to be an election day, at least a primary runoff day in Manhattan for those who would succeed the mayor. That has been canceled. Major League Baseball has canceled all games for tonight across the country. Games to be played this weekend by the NFL and other sporting venues still up in the air. The Professional Golf Association has canceled some of its upcoming meets. So this nation is going to be reeling for some time to come. As the mayor said, it's a time for all of us to be together, to unite, and to try to fight this evil and this cowardice that has inflicted this kind of pain and damage on American citizens.
All national monuments have been closed down in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. The borders between the United States and Canada, also the U.S. and Mexico, have been shut down. All employees at the nuclear laboratories in New Mexico, they too have been sent home. It's a coordinated response plan led by the Department of Justice. It's been practiced before. It is in place. We go now to Tony Snow in Washington with new information. Tony?
Thanks. Our Jim Angle is reporting that one of the reasons we don't know the whereabouts of the president is nobody has decided where he is going to end his day. There is a dispute going on at this moment between the Secret Service and the president's political advisors. The Secret Service wants the president to go to the NORAD facility out in the west, that is, of course, as you know, in the mountains, completely secure, completely invulnerable to any kind of attack. On the other hand, political advisors saying that it would make the president look like, quote, a weenie, have urged that he return to Washington, get back to the White House, possibly address the nation from the White House, and try to conduct business from there. The Secret Service counters that it doesn't matter that the president is back at the White House. They cannot absolutely guarantee security if a plane takes off from someplace other than the United States and heads toward our shores. We're going to have no choice but to blow it out of the air. So that's the debate that is going on. In addition, just to give you another sense of what has been going on at the Pentagon, the death toll there may be much lower. In fact, there may not be a death toll. The casualty toll there may be much lower than originally feared, for the simple reason that the part of the Pentagon that was struck today by an airliner was in fact undergoing renovation, and as a consequence, not all the offices there were occupied. Our James Rosen earlier had passed on a report, interestingly enough, that a couple of the offices in that portion of the Pentagon, portions that were struck, were offices that trying to deal with counterterrorism. One is called the Office of Homeland Defense. It's a newly created office that was slated to get a big budget increase, even though Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has been talking about reducing expenditures. And also, there was an office for special operations and low-intensity conflict. That is shorthand, again, for dealing with small wars with terrorists around the world. And that's the latest from Washington. Back to New York.
Tony Snow in Washington. Tony, thank you. With more information coming in about the disaster response in New York City, we take you back to New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and New York Governor George Pataki in the midst of their news conference. Let's listen.
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets over Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to this.
Mr. Mayor, I got reports of a gas explosion related to this. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible explosion.
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a precaution
where these aircraft came from? There was a report they may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts. And
Governor, do you think there should be any retaliation on the part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war?
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this hasn't?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything to make that point.
Jennifer Steiner, please. Just a housekeeping. Can you please tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer,
Can you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subways and the schools, the courts?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway's doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan. And throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers that they come in, or like
all NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now, and we're going to need all of them. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
if anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they do it?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
the National Guard looting or anything like that? Any lawlessness?
There have been no reports of lawlessness, no reports of looting. As I said, we saw a lot of people that were part of the escape effort, and they seem to be conducting themselves in a very, very sensible way, a very deliberate way. They seem to be helping each other. So I don't think we have any reports like that at all.
So the only National Guard we'll see will be in Lower Manhattan, in the bomb site area. They won't be patrolling the rest of Manhattan.
No, the purpose of it is to help with the relief effort. We're going to need the help of the state, surrounding areas with heavy-duty equipment.
When will they be arriving?
National Guard troops, some have arrived already, and we expect to have up to close to 2,000 between the National Guard and the state police by later this evening.
Mayor, bridges and tunnels will have to stay closed indefinitely?
I think everything is closed for now, and then maybe in about an hour or two we can give you an update on what the plan will be for tomorrow.
We saw a lot of lightly injured people walking out of the area because obviously the emergency services were needed for the very seriously injured. People covered with this. Some people had difficulty breathing. Is there any health advice to give to people who were caught in this thing, who are not necessarily at risk of losing their life, but
I think well, obviously if you feel ill or you feel that you've been affected by it, you should go to a hospital and get checked out. But if it's just discomfort that you feel, then you can do basically what we did, was to wash our faces off and get rid of the clothes and get to an area where you can breathe in fresh air.
How many people were in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack?
I mean, it was business had already started. It was right before 9 o'clock. I don't know.
Tens of thousands?
Yes. Approximately. Someone just gave me a number of approximately 10,000, but that's a guess.
How long will the city remain on a heightened state of alert?
Until we're told not to. I mean, until the FBI and the police department and the federal government tells us that we shouldn't. Right now, the city is should be on a state of alert. Now, that instead of frightening people, that should make people feel more confident that everything is being done to keep things secure. And again, let me emphasize that the reason for the National Guard, because I heard the question before, is to help with the relief effort, not because there's any fear of any other problems in the city right now.
How is the
Mr.
Port
Mayor, can you
Authority
tell us
certifying
about
the
the other
buildings,
public
Mr. Mayor?
buildings, City Hall, One Police Plaza? When will Chief say for you to return?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. Hopefully soon, but I don't know the answer to that.
And we heard reports that One Police Plaza was evacuated. Was that true?
No, the command center is open.
And it was never.
We have people in the command center right now.
Mr. Mayor, there have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about. And we're not going to know the answer to that until much later. And maybe we should just close now and give you a briefing later. And I would just ask everyone, I talked to Cardinal Egan before because he's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Everybody should in their own way say a prayer and ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than a vicious, cowardly terrorist, and we're going to overcome this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so the latest word from the mayor of New York and the governor of New York, George Pataki, and also Rudy Giuliani, the mayor. They're talking about the latest in this horrific terror strike in Manhattan, the World Trade Center obliterated by 2 hijacked airplanes. There you're looking at the Pentagon, where another hijacked airplane slammed into the outer south wall. The Pentagon fire coming at least under some amount of control now. At least you can see the building, although there is still fire burning on at least one of the inner rings of the Pentagon now. But that outer ring appears to, they appear to have gotten the fire under control, at least on the outer ring. The Pentagon is saying that the good news there is that that part of the building was undergoing renovation recently, and at this point had not been substantially reoccupied. So the plane slammed into a part of the building that was largely not being used. You cannot say that, though, for the situation in New York, where things were just getting underway at the World Trade Center, the largest office building in Manhattan. The Twin Towers, 110 stories, have both fallen after 2 hijacked jetliners were flown into them, flying bombs that brought those buildings down. Our Jim Angle is in Washington and has a late reaction from there. Jim?
Hello, John. Well, what we have to report from here is about the president. Now, you know the president left his location in Florida, wound up giving a short videotaped speech from Louisiana. The problem here is that his political advisors would like him to return to Washington and take control in order to tamp down any sense of panic among the public. But the Secret Service does not want the president to return to Washington because they fear they cannot guarantee his safety. Now, the Secret Service would prefer the president to go to NORAD, which is in Colorado. It's a mountain that has I'm sorry, the word just in is that the president has landed at an Air Force base in Nebraska. Now, the president is flying around the country while his advisors argue with the Secret Service over whether or not it's safe to return to Washington. Now, obviously, he will land at safe locations, Air Force bases, to refuel and to figure out where things are. The president can do everything he needs to do from Air Force One, but the fact is his political advisors would like him to return to Washington because they want the president to be able to take charge in an obvious way to eliminate any feelings of panic among the public, and for political reasons so that he looks in charge. The Secret Service says, look, we cannot guarantee the president's safety if he were in the White House and an airplane, a hijacked airplane like those that hit the World Trade Center and hit the Pentagon, were to crash into the White House. We cannot guarantee the president's safety. They want him to go to NORAD headquarters, which, as I was beginning to explain a moment ago, is a mountaintop in which, in the middle of which is built a secure area that is protected by metal doors several feet thick and was intended to be a place for officials to go, and is housed now houses a number of military installations. It was intended as a place for the president and officials to go in the case of nuclear war. It would clearly be safe from hijacked airplanes. That is where the Secret Service would like to take the president. His political advisors say, no, it is more important for the president to appear to be in charge, to make sure that the public is reassured that everything is okay, and that they do whatever they can to keep any sort of panic from happening in the public. Now, meantime, the White House staff itself has been evacuated. They are dispersed around the region, I am told, and continuing to work by phone and email. And some reporters are being taken to an undisclosed location where they are to be given a briefing by an undisclosed official. So, as you can see, there are great concerns about going back to the White House, either for the president or for his staff. John?
All right, Jim Angle reporting from Washington. Thank you. Yeah, that NORAD facility in Colorado Springs is quite literally a mountain that has been hollowed out inside. Yes, perhaps the safest place for the president to go in a situation like this, but you can see why his political advisors, Linda, want to make sure that the president is seen front and center, not giving in to the terrorists who, after all, want to terrify America. We are continuing to keep an eye. This is the situation that you saw earlier at the Pentagon. A number of injuries there after a hijacked jetliner slammed into the outer wall. They have the fire, at least on the outer ring of the Pentagon, fairly well under control now, but fires continue to burn on the inner ring or rings of the Pentagon. It's not yet clear how fully involved those inner rings are at this point.
Clarifying once again that the president is at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska right now. There are armed guards patrolling the White House, outside the White House. As you know, the Capitol has been totally evacuated. It was earlier this morning that armed guards, actually the Capitol Police, actually physically went into the Capitol and grabbed leaders of Congress to remove them, to take them to a place of safety. So as it stands, government leaders are all in safe places as of this hour.
It is 3 o'clock in the East. It is noon in the Pacific time zone, and America has been under attack this day, the 11th of September, 2001. A smoke cloud continues to billow from south of Manhattan, where you can see what happened shortly after 9 this morning. The second of 2 hijacked airplanes plowed into the side of the World Trade Center building you see there. The earlier tower already had been hit by another hijacked airplane. We understand that those planes from United and American Airlines. This is the collapse of the second tower that was hit. It was the first one to collapse, perhaps because the structural damage there was so much more severe and so much lower down. But the first of the towers collapsed around 10 o'clock this morning. Not long after that, within 30 minutes or so, the second tower collapsed under its own weight. The structural damage too much for those steel columns to bear. Now, on a normal day, 50,000 people would be working in the World Trade Center. Perhaps as many as 10,000 more might be visiting or doing business there. We don't yet know how many of those people were able to escape before this conflagration rained down on them. Again, taking you just south of New York, this is the Pentagon. About 9:45 this morning, about 30 minutes after the second attack in New York, a hijacked jetliner smashed into the south wall of the Pentagon, blowing a 100 to 150-foot hole into the side of the building and setting a fire that continues to burn at this hour. Now, all government buildings largely have been evacuated in Washington as a result, as a security precaution. The president, who had been scheduled to make an address in Florida, was hustled out of there, put aboard Air Force One, and flown to a secure site, Shreveport, Louisiana. He made a brief statement there, then got back in the air, and at last report was on the ground at an Air Force base in Nebraska. We are looking now live at these pictures from southern Manhattan, where you should be on a normal day. You would be seeing the World Trade Center standing tall and proud above all of those buildings gathered there at the tip of Manhattan. Instead, all you see is that ugly brown cloud of soot, smoke, and dust that is still emanating from the rubble left behind after this horrific day in America.
In certain major cities, New York and Washington, D.C. in particular, you may see fighter jets patrolling the skies. They've been scrambled to protect those who were not already hurt in these devastating accidents. Let us make clear what we have going on is the situation at the FAA. There is a national ground stop put in place. This means all flights are completely grounded. The soonest it might be lifted is sometime around noon tomorrow. For the meantime, the FAA is trying to track some 10 to 12 international flights that were some bound for like Honolulu and other places. Those are still being tracked. There were some 40 to 50 domestic flights that were already in the air at the time of these terrorist attacks. They have all been safely grounded. They've all been accounted for. However, we do have 4 flights that have been lost. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Dulles to Los Angeles, 77 passengers, 6 crew members lost. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers and 11 crew lost. United Airlines from Newark to San Francisco, Flight 93, 38 passengers and 7 crew lost. Also, United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles, 56 passengers and 9 crew lost. We go now to Shepard Smith, who has more information to bring in. Shepard?
Linda, I'm outside the Fox News studios here on the corner of 47th and 6th Avenues in Midtown Manhattan. As all of this happened in the morning, there is at least one bit of good news out of it all, and that is that it took so long for the second tower to be struck and then so long for them to fall. As a result, a lot of people were able to get out of the area and get away. Many of them headed toward Midtown Manhattan. The mayor of New York City and the governor announcing just a short time ago that much of transportation had returned to normal. But those of you who are familiar with Manhattan know that the lettered subway lines, he said, are working. The lettered lines and oftentimes work their way through the city and then out to the outer boroughs. The numbered lines are not working, we can presume, from what the mayor has just said. That would be the 1, 2, 3, and 9 line, which take you from World Trade Center all the way up the west side of Manhattan into the northern borough. And on the east side of Manhattan, the old IRT, the 4 and 5 express trains and the 6 train, which take literally millions of people up the east side of Manhattan, all closed as well, it's our understanding. So a lot of people have stopped on the Fox News Corner of the World to watch today, trying to figure out where it takes them next. A lot of these folks won't be able to make it home. The bridge and tunnel crossings are still out. And suffice it to say, with 50,000 people who work in that building, another 10,000 who were probably doing business in there, well, let's just put it this way. When the TWA flight fell out of the sky off Long Island shores, it seemed everyone in this city knew somebody who was involved in some way. And now we're talking about potentially 60,000 who may have been in that building. So many Manhattanites have a lot of grieving to do in the days to come. Where will you go tonight? Have you thought about how this is going to affect your personal life?
I'm just going to take it a minute at a time. Not really sure.
Where were you when it happened?
I was across the street, actually.
Across the street from World Trade?
Yes.
Describe it for me.
It's just pandemonium. It's scary.
Did you stay there, and once the structure collapsed, were you still there?
Yes, I helped 2 people cross the street, and we were all escorted away once it happened.
It's my understanding from talking to some of our correspondents and some of my friends, actually, who were down there at the time, that one of the amazing things to see was this group of people who lived and worked in other buildings who weren't affected, who were running out, taking off their clothes and making tourniquets and cleaning people off and calming people down, that it was really a remarkable sight. Did you witness that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. People were helping everyone, and I escorted 2 women from one side of the road to the other as the paramedics were arriving, and there was a lot of hurt people and a lot of panic.
Having covered so many tragedies in this country, from the Oklahoma City bombing to hurricanes and others, there's a cycle that we as people go through. There's this initial shock, and there's hurt, and there's fear, and there's wonder, and there's trying to figure out who to blame and where to put your feelings. That all transitions when the pictures of people dancing in the streets overseas are shown on television, and people become angry. Have you thought about how difficult it may become to keep this place from getting really weird? You know what I mean?
I know what you're saying, but I really haven't stopped to think about that aspect of it.
Certainly, it's a day that all of our lives have changed. To stand on the roof of this building and look south and not see those 2 towers there, realize how many people were in there at the time and all that is going on at this minute. That building is still in flames. What microwave trucks and satellite trucks were up close enough to show you at the bottom were no longer accessible once the tower came tumbling down. There are no live pictures out of that area, but there's an enormous evacuation and rescue effort that's underway. People by the thousands not able to get to hospitals. Triage is set up at different locations. The United States military has sent in 2 aircraft carriers to launch and come into the Port of New York and help with triage and rehabilitation of this area. The National Guard coming in. Right now, every single man and woman who is with the New York City Police Department and Fire Department is on duty. A man and a woman cannot work 24 hours a day indefinitely, so the federal government sending in reinforcements to help pick New York City up. inch by inch. A long and difficult day and night ahead, Linda and John, and the hope is that people will just remain calm and help a neighbor.
Shepard Smith, thanks very much. Shepard Smith outside our building here at the corner of 47th and 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. Again, you're looking at pictures from earlier downtown after this horrific event unfolded. The World Trade Center there on fire. At that point, it was still standing. As we speak, it is not. Both towers collapsed in a cascade of smoke and dust, and doubtless a tremendous loss of human life. Tony Snow has an update now for us from Washington. Tony?
Well, John, we've tried to explain why the president chose to land at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. The simple reason is it's head of what used to be called the Strategic Air Command is now called the United States Strategic Command. What is that? That's the command that involves all the military branches, that deals with such things as bombing runs, what we call strategic defense, which is long-reaching defense around the United States, which would involve everything from ballistic missiles to aircraft. So the president is there. They're having classified meetings at this hour, we presume, and we will find out later in the day whether he intends to return to Washington to go to the NORAD facility in Colorado, as Jim Angle has reported, or go to some other location. All of those things will be determined in the fullness of time. Also, Vice President Cheney is in the Operations Center at the White House at this hour, so that's where he is linking up. And now for more developments in our nation's capital, let's go to Brian Wilson, who's standing by near the Capitol. Brian?
Thank you very much, Tony. We are outside 119 D Street Northeast in Washington, D.C., which is the Capitol Police building and has become, for all intents and purposes, the temporary House of Congress. Members of the House and Senate have been here all day getting briefings on what's going on, the latest from the intelligence community. We can tell you that the leadership of the House and Senate from both sides of the aisle have been spirited away from this location and are being held in a secure bunker. They won't tell us exactly where that is, but they assure us that the House leadership and the Senate leadership are in contact with the President of the United States and that the government continues to operate. However, the Capitol grounds has been evacuated since early this morning when the first attack occurred at the Pentagon. The Capitol has been evacuated. All activity now operates out of this location, 119 D Street Northeast, the Capitol Police building. We must also tell you there is one report that has been very disturbing. It's becoming very credible. There were reports from early this morning that we are getting from members of Congress and eyewitnesses that at one point this morning a passenger jet came very, very close to the Capitol dome. We have not been able to get any official confirmation of this, but I must tell you that there are many people who are reliable, regular sources of information on Capitol Hill who are telling us they saw that happen. Other information on that is a bit sketchy. But the House and Senate has been in recess. We're not sure exactly when they might go back to the Capitol building and continue the work of the people, but some members are saying they should do that. The other word we're getting out of here is from members of the intelligence committees, and they are angry. They say that the Intelligence Committee had no information about what happened, no advance warning, and they say that the intelligence community failed them in a major way. Tony?
All right, we will jump in as Tony is gathering more information. We have some sad news to report as we are now starting to learn some of the identities of those who have been killed in the terrorist attacks today. It appears that a friend and a colleague here at Fox News has been killed in one of the plane crashes. Barbara Olson, you know her as a very familiar face as a frequent commentator on the Fox News channel and other networks. She is also the wife of Ted Olson, the Bush administration's nominee for Solicitor General. He was also very much involved in the Bush effort, working out the contest over the vote in Florida in the presidential election. It appears that Barbara Olson was on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She is believed dead, and we're very sad to report it. We're giving you more information of exactly what has happened to the 4 total planes that have gone down. 2 American Airlines, 2 United Airlines, all bound for California. 1 from New Jersey, 1 from Virginia, but 2 from Boston. With that, we go to reporter Phil Rapley. He is in Boston with more information. Phil?
Linda, Joe Lawless, who's the director of public safety here at Logan Airport, just spoke to the media for an extensive period of time a little bit ago, and he confirmed that 2 flights had left here this morning at 7:59, the American Airlines Flight 11, and at 8:14, the United Airlines Flight 175, appear to be the 2 jets that were driven into the World Trade Towers. They're both Boeing 767, so as you can imagine, the investigation going on here at Logan Airport is very intense. The entire airport has been locked down. It has been evacuated. A command center has been set up, and the investigation is being led by the FBI, along with the FAA. They are interviewing all the people involved in security here at Logan Airport. Now, the way it works here at Massport is that each of the airlines is responsible for its own security. So there are private contracting companies that are given that responsibility. Those employees are currently being investigated by law enforcement agencies as they try to find out how this could have happened, how both of these flights out of Logan this morning ended up involved in this terrible terrorist act. Now, also what's going on here at Logan is a crisis center, because more than 150 people have lost their lives in those 2 airplanes. So a crisis center has been set up for family members to come. There's a Red Cross there, there's clergy members there, there's also people from emergency medical services to try to offer any kind of support that they can in this time. Any passengers that were at Logan Airport have been taken off of the grounds. They will be put up by Massport until this airport is reopened again. That will not happen until the Federal Aviation Authority gives it the okay. But meanwhile, Joseph Lawless says that the security here is as high a security as any airport in the country, that Logan Airport is as safe as any airport in the country. That may be more of a commentary about the status of security all over the nation than it is particularly at this place. As we said before, the investigation is being led by the FBI at this point. Now, outside of the airport, the mayor of Boston has gone out and had a public press conference. He's urged the evacuation of the tallest towers in the city of Boston, the Prudential Tower, the Hancock Building. There's also been a press conference by the governor, the acting governor of Massachusetts. She says that it is the National Guard here is at the beck and call of any assistance they can provide to people in New York. There also is going to be a primary election today for the 9th Congressional District to replace the seat of the late Joseph Moakley. There was some talk early this morning by the Secretary of State that that election might be postponed, but now the governor and the Attorney General have come out strongly and said that it must go on, that they cannot have terrorism dictate to a democracy. So that is the way that the officials here in Massachusetts are trying to deal with this crisis situation. But the city of Boston, as I'm sure cities all around the nation, are just shocked by what has happened here. And in fact, there was a rush hour at noontime as people were leaving to go home to their loved ones. So, Linda, that's the report live at Logan Airport. I'm Bill Rapley, Fox News Channel.
Bill, thank you very much. We have this just in from the Pentagon, a clarification of the military mobilization. The Navy is sending 2 aircraft carriers to New York City based in Norfolk, Virginia. They are going there to hopefully, obviously, to respond to any threats from the air or sea, but also to provide civilian assistance through hospital facilities and so on here in the New York City area, as it appears that hospitals in the New York area have been completely overwhelmed. Also, at the same time, the Navy is sending amphibious ships with Marines on board to Washington, D.C. The carriers sent to New York City should arrive here by sometime tomorrow afternoon.
Bill made the point in that report that all of these flights, curiously, were bound for Los Angeles. What might be the significance? Possibly only this. If you're trying to fly cross country and if you're trying to fly from east to west, you're going to be fighting the headwinds, and going that distance, you're going to be taking the maximum amount of fuel on board possible. So if you are hoping to hijack a flying bomb, as these terrorists apparently were, you want as much fuel as possible to cause as much damage as possible when you bring these planes into their intended targets. And that may have been why all of these planes were bound for the West Coast. 45 people on board Flight 93 from Newark, New Jersey, United Airlines Flight 93. That plane went down apparently in a fairly wooded area about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Those people have lost their lives, but it could have been much worse. Again, our Brian Wilson reported credible reports of a plane passing very, very near the dome of the U.S. Capitol today. Whether or not it is that United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco is yet to be determined, but that is certainly a possibility. Somebody called from a cell phone who said he was a passenger on board that plane. He had locked himself in the restroom. He said it was not a hoax. They were being hijacked. But Flight 93 is no more. On any given day, the crash of that one aircraft with 45 people on board would dominate the news. But in a day like this, when the twin towers of the World Trade Center came under attack, also from hijacked airplanes, and when both of those towers came crumbling down, and when another hijacked aircraft slams into the wall of the Pentagon, that plane crash south of Pittsburgh is simply a footnote at this point, and that is an unbelievable comment to everything that's gone on today.
More international and national reaction. Word now from NATO that they have evacuated everyone from the Brussels headquarters, but they are planning an emergency meeting there. No start time, but it should be very shortly. Also, in the United States here, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as part of this federal response plan that's been put in place involving some 28 federal agencies, FEMA has sent out 8 urban search and rescue teams. They've activated them. They're going to New York City to search for any victims of the World Trade Center accident, the terrorist attack there. Also, the head of FEMA, Joe Albaugh, who was at a meeting in Blue Sky, Montana, has been turned around. He's been sent back to Washington, and he is on his way as we speak. Once again, also some of the other government precautions. Of course, all the national monuments in Washington, D.C. have been shut down. People have been evacuated. They will not be allowed there, and there's no idea yet when they'll be allowed back at any time. However, at the Pentagon, which for the most part was evacuated when the plane crash occurred there, there is the National Military Command Center. That's in the basement of the Pentagon. Personnel at last reporting were still there because they are heavily involved in coordinating a response. The National Security Agency, the CIA, those staff have been moved to an undisclosed location. This all part of a national response, also part of the Pentagon being under what they call ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest threat alert possible at the Department of Defense. They are taking precautions. They also have, as we have reported, they have the leaders of Congress in a secure location as they formulate a response. The president, as you know, is at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. The vice president is safe. His wife is safe. Also, First Lady Laura Bush. They are safe, but they are being held in locations that the Secret Service at this hour is not disclosing.
2,400 people were killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1941. And Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska is saying, quote, this is the second Pearl Harbor. Newt Gingrich was on Fox News Channel earlier today saying very much the same thing. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on our nation's military leaders to come up with some kind of a target for a military response. However, as you can understand, until you know who brought about this kind of devastation, it's really too early to be talking about a military response. You're looking at live pictures. This is still what's going on in downtown Manhattan. This is the view from north to south, looking toward the spot, looking actually toward the Statue of Liberty and the spot there on the right of your screen where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center stood. And that until about 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning. About 5 hours ago, they crumbled. This after they became the targets of some madmen with a grudge against America. Let's go to Rick Leventhal, who was there when all of this unfolded. Rick, it's good to see you still with us.
Thanks, John. We did have some frightening moments out here earlier this morning. I was in my office before 9 a.m. when I got the page that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and I couldn't believe it. I thought there must have been some mistake, and sure enough, turned on the television, saw the video, jumped in a subway to come down here to Lower Manhattan. The train stopped. I had to get out at Canal Street, which isn't too far away, but a lot of people had to get out way before then, and they stopped train service. And you know, as I was walking down here towards where the World Trade Center is located, the Twin Towers were still standing, and there were people on every single street corner just staring up like they would be tourists. But these are locals, these are residents who were standing there staring at these two towers that were on fire with holes in the sides of the buildings. One of the most recognizable attractions in the world, the World Trade Center is. And it was a smoking hulk of wreckage, and again, people just staring at it. I can't believe that this is happening. So we get closer and closer, and with my press ID, I was able to get a block further west and basically 1 block to the north of the World Trade Center towers when police said you cannot go go any further. They stopped us there, and this is before the two buildings collapsed, and it was chaotic. There was police and rescue personnel all over the place, still trying to figure out what was going on. That's when we were hearing that there was a second plane that had hit the second tower, and everyone was trying to respond to that disaster, and people were swarming towards the buildings to try and rescue the people who were in the buildings. We then moved, our satellite truck parked a couple blocks further south of us here on Church Street, which basically runs right into the front of the World Trade Center buildings. You can't see it now because of all the smoke that's still in the street from where the buildings are burning, but we were there in the street virtually around the corner from the first tower when it collapsed. And we saw hundreds of people running up the street right at us, many of them yelling, screaming, run, the building's collapsing. I'm talking police officers included, running for their lives because this building was coming down. And what followed them was a gigantic cloud of smoke and debris, perhaps 100 feet high, rolling up Church Street, rolling north, as the building fell down and pushed all of its debris up the street. We took refuge inside the satellite truck, which was parked right there. We didn't know what was coming, what to expect. We jumped in the truck, waited for the smoke to clear. We got out, and some of the rescue personnel then began flooding back into this area. Shortly after that, we heard that the second tower was coming down, and it was very, very disturbing, to say the least, to hear that this second tower was going to collapse right next to us. And again, a similar scene played out where police officers and paramedics and emergency personnel and just women and children in the street who happened to be down here came running this way. We too dropped our camera and ran north to get out of the way of the clouds of smoke and debris, which were actually rolling up the side streets as well, being pushed north and then up the side street. So each block that we passed, we saw yet more debris coming our way. A chaotic scene, to say the least. Since then, things have calmed down quite a bit. They've cleared the streets of almost all pedestrians, of all vehicle traffic, certainly, except for emergency vehicles, police and fire trucks and that sort of thing. We know that a triage has been set up right around the corner from us here. There was an ambulance staging area right next to us earlier today. Those ambulances were able to move down closer to the building. But we don't know if rescue personnel have been able to get into the rubble of the World Trade Center buildings themselves. I spoke with one friend of mine who was right by the buildings, who got close and saw blown out cars and rubble everywhere. Another guy who told me he tried to pull people out, or tried to at least assist in looking for people who might be trapped, said that one of the two towers, there's still some 20 stories standing. The other he described as a hole in the ground. Right now, again, things quite a bit calmer, very quiet, very serene out here almost, as people just basically wait to see what the next step will be. Again, the mayor saying that rescue and recovery is the primary goal here at this point, but certainly a very frightening moment. And we'll push in now. Maybe we can see there's a giant chunk of one of the two towers in the middle of Church Street, in front of the building, where the building used to be. I don't know if you can see it through the smoke and the haze, but there is a large piece of the building in the middle of the street. Obviously, it's all been closed off, and again, the fire and rescue personnel on scene trying to get close to the building. But many of these firefighters believe they have lost coworkers in that debris, because after the initial strike, the two planes hitting the towers, all these emergency personnel responding to the scene were helping to evacuate people who were still in the buildings and trying to clear people out of the area. And at that point, soon after that, is when the first tower collapsed. So there's a great fear that there may have been many emergency workers trapped at the base of that building when it did collapse. And possibly the most disturbing aspect of all of this is videotape that I don't think we can show you, but it's videotape of people who were on the very high floors of the World Trade Center. Okay, apparently we can show it because we've seen it, but it's the most disturbing videotape I've certainly ever seen of people who were completely without any hope. Trapped in the building with flames behind them and above them and below them, leaping from high floors to their deaths below. No word from here on the numbers of deaths or injured, but certainly we've been hearing as many as 10,000 people, and it'll be a while before they can get to many of them. Back to you in the studio.
Correspondent Rick Leventhal. Rick, thank you for the update. We have more information coming in as to the U.S. military response to this. Not only have some fairly innocuous places like any of the major national monuments been closed down, and even theme parks like the Disney World, Disneyland, they've been closed down too. But they also have closed the border between the United States and Canada, the border between the United States and Mexico. We are now just getting information that it is the USS John F. Kennedy and the USS George Washington that have now been deployed to New York Harbor. We also understand that there will be amphibious ships, guided missile cruisers, and guided missile destroyers that are all also being deployed. Where they will be sent, it's not clear right now. We are expecting a briefing from the Pentagon, actually not from inside the Pentagon, but from Pentagon officials. In a matter of a couple of minutes, that will clarify exactly what they're doing. But now, in addition to the Pentagon being at ThreatCon Delta, we understand that Navy installations all up and down the East Coast have also been put on ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest level of alert for the U.S. military. With the aircraft carriers coming into New York to help with some of the hospital response, we take it now to correspondent Molly Falconer, who is at one of the hospitals in New York City that is completely overwhelmed. Molly?
It's a hospital in chaos. It's been ground zero for the injured here all morning. We've been watching stretchers going in and out of the hospital, some horrifying scenes. And right now we are seeing some of the emergency medical supplies. They're just overwhelmed here. So we've been seeing 18-wheeler trucks just being brought in down the streets of Manhattan. As you can see, they're parked over across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital. That's a medical center that's handling over 100 of the dead, injured, and very badly burned here today. Basically, they ran out of supplies. They ran out of blood. They ran out of something called Silvadine, which treats burns. They have been raiding local pharmacies for more of that. They didn't have enough, so apparently now they've had more medical supplies brought in. As you can see, the sirens are going up and down the street right here. They have closed off all of 7th Avenue. That's one of the main thoroughfares in Manhattan. It runs right by the hospital. It also runs all the way down to Wall Street. So they are using this as an emergency corridor to ferry up the wounded and other casualties of this horrifying attack. We've been seeing police officers coming up and down here. The mayor was speeding by here earlier today. Also, New York City yellow cabs have been commandeered to bring in doctors and nurses. We've been seeing them come up and down here, going both ways on the street all this morning. Also, New York City buses are bussing in loads of doctors and nurses. They are calling now, hospital personnel are calling for clothing, because so many of the victims have had their clothing blown off them that they need extra shirts, pants, shoes, anything you have. They're asking for it here at St. Vincent's. They're also asking for type O positive blood. You can see behind me also the crowds are just waiting here for words of their loved ones. There is a makeshift information booth. I don't know if you can see that sign. It's just hand lettered. Things are happening so fast down here that they're trying to get the information out as fast as they possibly can. They set up a makeshift, almost card table, and a yellow sign just stuck on the wall of the hospital to let people know where the dead and injured are today. We were supposed to have a briefing about this at about 3 o'clock. Apparently, hospital staff are just so overwhelmed that they had to push that back until 4 o'clock, and we'll bring you the latest word from that as we know it. That briefing, again, has been pushed back until 4 o'clock. Hospital personnel just overwhelmed. They couldn't get it to us in time at 3 o'clock. But here's what we know. Over 100 injured, wounded, possibly dead are inside St. Vincent's. They have commandeered everything from hospital corridors to the hospital gym to serve as makeshift ERs. The entire trauma staff is on alert. They have a disaster plan in action. I talked to a doctor or two who was in there this morning. They said that things are actually pretty calm, that people have been trained for this, and they are doing exactly what they have been trained to do. They are dealing with the casualties as best they can, and apparently that effort is going well. But the problem has been supplies. Those are being trucked in as we speak. We just saw one of the pharmacies and food operations around here. They've been donating water. They've been donating sandwiches. That's just getting wheeled across the streets. As you can see, construction personnel are here to add more barriers to what is just sort of a siege mentality at the hospital. We've seen police lock this place down as if there is a bomb threat. There is not anything like that, but it is being treated as a scene of great trauma. Also, we should tell you that Cardinal Egan was here and may still be here. He is the Archbishop of New York. He has been offering prayers for all of the dead and wounded who have been streaming in and out of this hospital. He has been on scene along with other chaplains and spiritual leaders, as well as city leaders. We talked to the city controller, Alan Hevesy, earlier, who was talking about how there was hundreds of firefighters and policemen who started running towards one of the towers right after one of the disasters, and then they were not heard of again. He was down here to donate blood, but we are also hearing about the fate of those firemen and police officers who ran towards one of the towers in a rescue effort. And as you can hear, the dead and wounded keep coming in. There's more NYPD personnel streaming down this closed-off 7th Avenue. We should also tell you that this entire block area has been locked down, so if you have friends, relatives that you want to check in on, you have to call St. Vincent's Hospital. Listen in for the briefing later that they are saying now is at 4 o'clock, or call Cornell Medical Center, NYU, or any of the other burn centers within Manhattan. There are over 50 that are handling the massive amounts of casualties. We'll bring you the latest as we have it. Back to you.
All right, Molly Falconer, thanks very much. Want to bring you the latest bird's eye view of what's going on, at least in Manhattan, from our Daria Alexander, who is on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Dari?
Hello. You know, I just have to stop for a second and tell you, I was downstairs earlier. I was raised in New York. I am a New Yorker. I have to tell you that this is absolutely devastating. Devastating to New Yorkers to see the two tallest buildings that were tourist sites go down, to be hit by planes, not by accident, and then to see them crumble. It is an absolutely devastating thing. New Yorkers think of themselves as being strong, invincible. To see the city taken under siege like this is just, it is absolutely too much to handle. I was downstairs earlier and I was talking to people who were standing all around Fox Central to get the absolute latest. And everybody is just in shock. Nobody can believe that this is actually happening. Let's just take a look once again straight south at these two buildings. The smoke, just billowing, smoke throughout the sky. The Twin Towers were a great place to get a view of New York City skyline, to get a view of the harbor, the Statue of Liberty. Something else that was in that building, I know we talked about banking and security and all different businesses in that building. A famous restaurant, Windows on the World. I took a wine class there back in the early 90s. A fabulous, beautiful restaurant where people used to go to eat so they could see New York City. This was definitely a mainstay. People will not, it will take forever to get over it. I know a lot of people have been talking about the fact that some people knew some people who were in the building, others didn't know people in the building, but once again, this is something that everybody in New York feels, whether or not you knew them. The other thing that is just incredible is to think that there are warplanes flying all over the sky throughout New York City. And I mean, this is not an air show. This is serious. The city is under siege, and we are seeing warplanes fly across the skies every few minutes.
All right, Daria Alexander, there on the roof of our building. Thanks very much. Yes, the entire air system in our nation has been shut down. No airplanes anywhere being allowed to take off. Those that were in the air today when this horrific terrorist attack went down were ordered to land immediately.
All right, we want to get more information as to who senior officials may think will be found responsible for this horrible act of terrorism. We want to go now on the phone to Lawrence Korb. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. He is currently at the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Korb, thanks for being with us.
Nice to be with you.
We understand that at least 3 Palestinian groups, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they have all denied any responsibility for these terrorist acts. Some, actually a number of terrorist experts have said that they believe it is the work of Osama bin Laden. What do you think?
Well, he certainly has said he was going to do something, and so that would be logical to expect him to do it. We don't have any proof yet, but I imagine, given the fact that people had to get on these planes and buy tickets and stuff, we'll be able to establish that pretty clearly within a short amount of time.
I want to explain something to our viewers as they see this on the screen. Yasser Arafat, who is the Palestinian leader, has come out also condemning the attack and saying that he personally and his organization is shocked and horrified. So let us not misunderstand the pictures that we see on the screen. These are some Palestinians in parts of Israel celebrating the attack. We should make it clear that this is separate from the official response of Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Mr. Korb, a question about what we do in terms of a military response. People have already begun talking about when we are likely to respond, how we are likely to respond. From your term as the Assistant Secretary of Defense, explain to us how something like this works in terms of a response at the Pentagon.
Well, you have to find out who did it and how you can get to them, but it's much easier said than done. We still haven't held anybody responsible for the blowing up of the USS Cole, the ship in Aden. We haven't punished those who blew up the Khobar Tower. That's the problem. It's not an individual nation. These are groups that cut across nations, and it's very, very hard to decide where to retaliate. They also hide themselves among civilians. This is not a large army. This is comparatively small groups of people, and that's going to be the frustrating thing. We're going to want to do something, and it's going to be very hard to do it. When I was in government, we never were able to successfully retaliate for those who blew up the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. We never really did get those who did it.
Right. I want to ask you about something that we saw today. Fairly quickly after we saw these attacks, we saw the leaders of the Taliban government of Afghanistan rushing essentially out to cameras to condemn the attack. Even one of them said that he believed it was impossible for Osama bin Laden to have any sort of involvement with it. If one were being skeptical, one might think that they were simply trying to save their own necks because the United States government would be looking directly at Afghanistan for harboring bin Laden for so long.
Well, there's no doubt about that. The problem you're going to face is that it's going to be hard to establish a definite link between these people and bin Laden. I mean, bin Laden, doesn't hold group meetings, in his basement once a week. I mean, these are people that are connected to him with several cutouts all over the world. And as we saw in the recent trial here in New York City for those who blew up the American embassies in Africa back in '98, some of them said they were connected, others did not, and we couldn't bring him to trial. But there's no doubt that the Taliban government in Afghanistan doesn't want to be held responsible, because if this were directed by them or they had any complicity, we would have every right to go and basically inflict terrible damage on them.
And just to reiterate, the pictures that you're seeing on your screen today were taken in Palestinian neighborhoods. Palestinians there celebrating this strike at America. As Linda said earlier, Yasser Arafat, the Palestine Liberation Authority leader, condemned the attacks, but that is not preventing this outpouring of great joy, if you want to call it that, among Palestinian people who doubtless see this as a strike against the hated enemy, America. So these pictures taken earlier today in Palestinian areas.
We take it back to Larry Korb, who's graciously joining us on the phone and helping us understand exactly how the U.S. military would formulate a response. Larry, even though Osama bin Laden wasn't necessarily considered a force during the Reagan administration, certainly you had procedures in place for how to coordinate a response to a terrorist attack. What were they?
Well, obviously, but there are things that you can do, but you have to know who to respond against,
right.
And that's the problem.
But I mean, in terms of sort of, do you have the National Military Command Center in the basement of the Pentagon? Are they
Well, yeah,
leading?
Obviously. I mean, what you do then is you have the forces in the area. Most probably you would have ships with cruise missiles or planes with cruise missiles that would attack. Remember, we did attack bin Laden after the blowing up of the embassies in Africa in 1998. We did attack his camp.
Right.
So, yes, I mean, we have forces all around the world. We have bombers that can fly from the United States that attack any place in the world. So that's probably what we would do if we found the people. But that's the problem you have in this new era, that these groups don't belong to any one nation, and there's no real central headquarters that you can hit.
Also, you generally, as I understand it, you, meaning the Pentagon, I mean leaders at the Pentagon, have a list of response targets already prepared before an attack ever occurs against the United States. There's already a list that you deploy when given the go-ahead by the White House, correct?
Well, that's right. I mean, you have a number. I mean, we have very good intelligence. Our technical intelligence is terrific. We know where these people are, and if we can make a link, yes, then we can go ahead and go after them. The problem is making that link, because the United States stands for decency in the world, and innocent until you're proven guilty. So it's hard for us to do some of the things that I think the relatives of these poor folks in New York today are going to want us to do because of the procedures that we follow.
Right. Now, I want to take you back again to a statement of a Taliban official, obviously the Taliban government being that in charge of Afghanistan. He said, quote, bin Laden does not have the facilities to orchestrate such a major assault within the United States. Some other terrorism experts are saying that he may be the only person who has the kind of organization to orchestrate this kind of attack. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I think he's the only one. And remember, we're not talking, I mean, he didn't buy missiles or anything like that. What they basically did was hijack 4 airplanes.
Right.
And he certainly has the wherewithal to do that.
Now, the ultimate go-ahead for any sort of strike, when it comes, if it is determined fairly clearly that we have figured out who is responsible for this, how does the chain of command work? I mean, who gives the go-ahead, and where does it have to sort of, does it originate from the top, from the commander-in-chief, the president?
Right. Only the president can order military action, and then he sends the order to the Secretary of Defense, who transmits it to the field commander. But only the president has that authority under our Constitution.
Now, when you say he transmits it to the field commander, does he speak to Donald Rumsfeld?
Yeah, the president.
And then it goes to the Joint Chiefs, or how exactly does it go down the...
Normally what the president would do is he would sign the order or direct the Secretary of Defense to execute whatever the contingency plan would be. The Secretary of Defense would sign the order, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would transmit it through military channels to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, the Commander-in-Chief of our Atlantic forces, or whoever is the area commander. The Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command, for example, would have responsibility for that area. That was General Schwarzkopf's job during the Gulf War. He was the commander of the Central Command.
Mr. Corbett, John Scott, with just a general question. I mean, what are our options? We lobbed some cruise missiles at Osama bin Laden years ago. That didn't seem to have much of an effect. What kinds of operations, just in broad strokes, can we consider here?
Well, I think you have to stop these before these people get into the country, get onto your planes, or get these weapons, and it has to be done by the international community. As powerful as we are, the United States cannot do this by itself, because without working with the rest of the world, we can't get these people. And that's the frustrating thing. You saw what happened when we sent the FBI to Aden to investigate what happened with the coal. We didn't get the cooperation. Unfortunately, the world has to deal with this, and the United States needs to take the lead in getting the world to establish guidelines about dealing with these terrorists. Because if they can do it here, they can do it any place.
Let's say we can trace the perpetrators of this to some country somewhere in the world. Would you suggest to the president, if you were still advising him, would you suggest some kind of an armed invasion to go in and get whoever's responsible?
Yeah, I would suggest going in and getting them and working through the local authorities if you could. I mean, because a lot of our friends around the world will be more than happy to help us. And so if the person is in country X, you work with the law enforcement and armed forces there to get them out and bring them to justice.
Larry Korb, we thank you very much, of the Council on Foreign Relations, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you once again. We take it now to correspondent Rick Leventhal. Perhaps the heroes of this day will be those who have been performing rescue on those who are trapped inside. Rick Leventhal is with one of those individuals right now. Rick?
Countless rescues performed by Bill Quick here with the New York City Fire Department. I know you were on vacation and this happens. Take us through what your first call, and what you did after that.
I drove in. I live in Long Beach. I drove in my car. I could see the smoke coming from the World Trade Center. I have a radio in my car. I can hear everything that's going on. Just mayhem. First plane hit. Second plane hit. The first time I got there, I ran up to the building, and a police officer said, "I got people trapped down in the subway." So I went into the subway, went downstairs, got people up. People are bleeding, screaming, crying. And I just said, just come upstairs, go to your left, just keep going to your left. Just find the ambulance, go to your left, go to your left. Within 2 to 3 minutes after that, the first collapse happened of the building. I don't know which building it was. It came down. I was outside. I ran behind a pillar. I got down on the floor. I covered in my coat. I didn't have a mask at the time. I covered my coat, and I was trying to survive. And it was total pitch black for like 10 to 15 minutes. There was an EMT next to me. He goes, "I think I'm burnt." So I looked at him. I said, "No, you're not burnt. You're just covered with soot, hot soot and everything like that." After that, he went on his way. I went and got a mask. I went back in the building, and I went searching for more people, and we found out that there was nobody else left down the subway.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
So Karen Hughes apparently taking no questions. Karen Hughes, the senior advisor to the president, giving us an update on the status of some of the most senior people in Washington. The president is most recently landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. She said the president is at a secure location, but she did not necessarily suggest that he is on the base itself. One believes he probably still is. The vice president and the national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the White House in a secure location, probably that basement bunker there.
It is not very often that this nation is brought to a standstill, but on today, it has happened. Many people here in New York City, in Washington, D.C., all over the country, staring at their televisions, unable to believe what they are seeing happening before them. You see it here on the corner of 48th Street and 6th Avenue in New York City, outside the Fox News Channel headquarters. We have seen this sight in many locations. People just simply in shock at what they're seeing. Who could have thought that an attack of this magnitude would happen in the United States of America? We have had officials planning for such an attack for some time, but many ordinary citizens thought that something like this could never actually happen. So much security in place, so many times that defense officials and others have war-gamed this out and planned for an attack. But on this day, it has happened. No one able to figure out why, particularly September 11th, the year 2001. One person has mentioned that it was supposed to be tomorrow that an associate of Osama bin Laden was due to be sentenced in New York. And others have mentioned that they believe Osama bin Laden is perhaps the only terrorist with the kind of organization who could plan something this massive and this deadly. The United States government not confirming anything of the kind. The Afghan government, which has been accused of for some years of harboring Osama bin Laden, rushing to say that they have no knowledge of this and they condemn it. However, they have for years not given Osama bin Laden up to the United States, despite repeated requests from Washington. They are also saying that they do not believe Osama bin Laden is capable of this. There may be many in Washington who believe otherwise at this hour. We're waiting for more briefings to come in. Some planning at the Department of Defense. As you know, Secretary Rumsfeld is still there at this hour. Others with officials in New York City, we are going to bring those to you just as soon as they happen. They're going to be happening just sort of suddenly, and as they do, we're going to bring them to you here on the Fox News Channel.
There are a great number of survivors you can see being carted away. This from the lower Manhattan area, where our Rick Leventhal has been doing a great job of reporting all day. Rick is back with us now live and safe, we're happy to say. Rick, what's the latest there?
Well, John, one of the things that you did not hear from firefighter Bill Quick, who I was just speaking with a short time ago, is I asked him, after Karen Hughes' news conference began and we had to break away, I asked him about the number of rescue workers on the ground when that building collapsed, when the first tower collapsed. And he said, in fact, there were hundreds of rescue workers at the base of the building tending to people who had been injured by falling debris from when the planes hit, tending to people who had been hurt by rubble and were bleeding and dazed and wounded and disoriented, trying to help those people when that tower collapsed. And there is a growing concern that hundreds, possibly hundreds, of emergency rescue workers, police officers, firefighters, maybe some very high-ranking members of this city's fire department were killed in the debris that fell from the first of the two towers. After that first tower collapsed, people did clear out of the area very quickly. Some people did go back before that second tower collapsed, so it's possible people were killed in that one as well. But certainly, if there was a high death toll in terms of when the towers came down, it would have been after the first tower. We'll give you a look south on Church Street, where the efforts continue to try and put out the fires that still burn in what's left of the Twin Towers. We're told that one of the two buildings, there may be as many as 10 to 20 stories left standing. The other one, though, is a crater. It's virtually a hole in the ground. You might even be able to see, Adam, can you see the piece of the building? There's a piece of the building in the middle of Church Street. You can't see it right now because of the smoke and the haze, but we're going to, apparently, Rudy Giuliani is now speaking to the mayor of New York. Let's head back to the studio and to the mayor's press conference. Do we have the mayor?
We're attempting, Rick, to get the audio connections from the mayor.
And they handled themselves with bravery. They handled themselves with dignity.
They handled themselves in a way that reduced the loss of life. We didn't have panic. We didn't have people running and hurting other people. And people of New York City really distinguished themselves. And I just want to say this once again. New York City is a lot stronger than this, and we're going to overcome it, and the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We need you.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, there making another statement about the response of this city. Linda, I'd just like to say I've been in this chair now for about, well, it was just about exactly 7 hours ago that the first of these events started unfolding. What a calamitous day for America. And yet, you know that somewhere in the world, somebody is watching these pictures with great glee. Watching the pictures of the hijacked airliner, the second one of the day, smashing into and ultimately demolishing the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, the symbol of capitalism to many people around the world. They want us to be scared. They want us to be afraid. As we heard President Bush's senior advisor say not long ago that our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today. They want us to somehow lose some of that freedom, and let's just hope and pray that that doesn't happen.
The United States most definitely will not allow it to happen. However, there will be a coordinated response, you can be sure. We are beginning to get more information about those who were lost today. The numbers in the end may be in the tens of thousands, but we know for sure the number of people who were lost on the 4 commercial airliners that went down today. They were 2 American Airlines planes, 2 United Airlines planes. In honor of those souls departed, let us remind you of who and how many were on those planes. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Dulles, Virginia to Los Angeles, 77 passengers and 6 crew. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers and 11 crew. United Airlines from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, Flight 93, 38 passengers and 7 crew. Also, United Airlines Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles, 56 passengers and 9 crew. As we mentioned before, as we're beginning to learn more details about those who may have been on those planes, we here at Fox News have also learned that a friend and a colleague was lost on that airplane that crashed into the Pentagon. Her name is Barbara Olson, and you may have seen her many times on this network and others. Her husband is Ted Olson, also a famous face. He was nominated by the Bush administration to be Solicitor General, was heavily involved in the Bush administration effort during the contesting of the Florida vote during the presidential election. Barbara Olson made a phone call from that flight, apparently, before it crashed into the Pentagon. We have learned that she is presumed dead, and we say that with great sorrow. And we will learn, I'm sure, in the coming hours, many more people who we know, who you know, around America who were involved in these accidents and who may have been lost. There we see her picture. We're sorry to say goodbye to a friend and a colleague. We have been given some preliminary estimates about how many may have died in the World Trade Center attacks. According to Congressman Jim Moran, who was part of a briefing much earlier today, his first estimate that he was given was perhaps 10,000 people. Now, as we learned from World Trade Center officials, the buildings, the 2 skyscrapers, were at full capacity this morning when the 2 planes slammed into the towers. Full capacity means at least 50,000 people. It will take some time, many hours, if not days, before we can determine exactly how many people were lost in that attack. There is a coordinated response underway. It's called a federal response plan. 28 federal agencies involved. This is a plan that has been around for some years. It was updated last year after the Oklahoma City bombing, many years after the Oklahoma City bombing. And now, unfortunately, it has been put into place. The Justice Department leads it, basically. The FBI leads the investigation. But as you can imagine, all federal agencies, and all personnel involved with the federal agencies have all been called in for help. Federal Emergency Response Agency, FEMA, actively involved. They have now activated 8 urban search and response teams in New York City to search through the rubble that you have seen of the collapse of these towers on your screen. They're being activated and dispatched to search through the rubble for any survivors. The hospitals in New York City have been completely overwhelmed by the wounded. In fact, some of the wounded have now been evacuated across the river to New Jersey. Also, the hospitals in Connecticut on complete standby. The Pentagon is at the highest level of alert. It's something called ThreatCon Delta. Usually it's at ThreatCon Normal, but today was escalated to ThreatCon Delta as the Secretary of Defense continues to operate from that building, trying to coordinate what, if any, military response will be necessary. We do know a little more clarification from the Pentagon. Originally, we had been told that 2 aircraft carriers had been dispatched from Norfolk to come to the New York Harbor. That apparently has been clarified. Those aircraft carriers have been sent out of their base for their own protection, but they are not being sent to the New York Harbor. Other ships are being sent to the New York Harbor. They have not been identified as of yet, but preliminarily we have been told that they are being sent here to help not only with protection, but also to help with the massive rescue response to the wounded. We bring in with me my colleague, John Gibson, who's going to be joining us for the next several hours in our coverage. John.
Amazing job you and John Scott have done. This is a national disaster and a national tragedy, and I think the country now moved forward on 2 levels immediately, or 3. The huge rescue effort that's going to go on down at the World Trade Center, as many as 10,000 an estimate. 50,000 people were in the building at the time those planes hit it. No one knows exactly how many people may have survived the collapse of those buildings or lie there dead, as well as the hundreds of fire workers and police workers who were at the base of the building. Our own Dan Cohen was there as 2 of them. The first one collapsed, and Dan was helping triage people and moved to the second one, and it collapsed on top of them. And as Linda mentioned just a while ago, perhaps the first face on this national tragedy is Barbara Olson, 46 years old, who's appeared on this network many times in various political discussions. The tragedy of Barbara Olson's death is going to be repeated over and over and over in the next few days as more faces, as we look at this plane hitting the trade tower this morning. As more faces are placed with the statistics. In addition, there is a question, as Linda was talking with Larry Korb earlier, how did this happen and who do we blame? Certainly one of the areas that somebody's got to look at is who's flying these planes? Does anybody really think an American pilot was at the yoke flying them into the trade towers? Or was someone trained to fly heavy jets and fly them into the World Trade Center? And if they were trained, who trained them? In what countries? And are those countries to blame for training people to fly these planes to then carry out these attacks on the United States? Certainly there are many countries in the Middle East who don't like us, who fly heavy jets, who have to train people. Iran does. Syria does. Iraq does. All of them are potential candidates for who trained these pilots.